Today's topic is coping with change. Lynn and I had a lot of changes last year. I really didn't want to do this topic. I felt I was being asked to do this topic, and I kind of resisted for a while because there's no magic formula. I don't have a pill I can give you to make change all happy and great. But we all handle change in our own ways. But even good change, and a lot of change is excellent. But for some reason, I think most of us struggle at least a little bit with change. So, and I got online just for fun and Googled change and how people handle it. And a lot of psychological stuff, a lot like if you have a loss, first it's disbelief, then anger. You go through, I think it's 5 stages. And I'm not really going to cover that because you can Google coping with change and everybody talks about the same 5 or 6 tools. But we have different tools with our relationship with Prophet and Heavenly Father and knowing we're soul. We have a different way of approaching change. So I'm disappointed I can't give you a magic pill and make it all happy every time there's change, even when it's a loss or something sad. But I've got 9 or 10 viewpoints and things I can remind you of that I think will help. So if you have a lot of angst or anxiety or stress or strain in change, and some of the points I share today, a little different than you'll find online, significantly different, frankly. If it can make the transition a little bit easier, I think it'd be worth our time. So I appreciate you coming today. Uh, so the first thing I want to do, and I'm going to go over things that you already know, but you probably hadn't thought about in a long time. I want to cover and kind of paint a broad picture of change. The planet down here, it's designed by the Heavenly Father for constant change and turmoil and war and all kinds of stuff. So if we're down here looking for peace and everything to be steady forever, I think we'll generally be disappointed. So I'm going to share some things, just a wide swath of change, which you all know, but it's probably kind of in the back of your head. I want to get it from the back of your head to the front of the head, kind of, and then we can talk about 9 or 10 different possibilities, how to make change down here. Once you recognize it's inevitable, um, then I think the things I want to share will make more sense if we lightly review change down here on planet Earth. Okay. The only thing that doesn't change is the Heavenly Father. Everything else changes. So maybe just knowing things change and not being too surprised will help. Probably not too much. So I've got a few other points. So the first thing before I get into painting a picture to really show you the magnitude of change on the planet, that it's inevitable, and change in our personal lives and change in countries and empires and all that kind of stuff, even in ice ages versus warm times. I want to remind us all, and this group knows it more than maybe most, that we're soul first. That's our eternal self that has a body. And that's a whole different way of looking at this topic, coping with change, than I think most people will look at it. God created us. You all know this, but kind of a review that I hope will tie into the topic today on the 12th heaven, which most of you have been to or will be taken to someday. You were created as soul out of a piece of his voice, the Holy Spirit. And we know more precisely the Holy Spirit is made of light and sound. So you're a ball of light and sound with all these wonderful attributes. When you were first created a long, long time ago, you were very immature, like all of us were, me too. And God was not surprised. He wasn't angry. He's a pretty smart God. He knew he just created you. You didn't have a lot of street smarts or a lot of experience. So he sent us down here over a period of time to the lower worlds to get experience. Okay. This is a view that most people do not have. So it was a gift of love when we were immature souls to come down to the lower worlds and eventually to the physical. It took a while to get down here and get experience. And how do you gain experience? What if your life is absolutely consistent? Nothing changes for the whole 60, 70, or 100 years you live? Would that give you much experience? It would give you some experience, but it'd be very limited. So what I'm trying to start right out at is when we have, if God wants us to have a lot of different experiences, and most experiences tie in with learning how to give and receive love and become more spiritually mature, can you see that change is part of the program? It's like you go to college, if you took the same course for 4 years, you'd have a very narrow experience or view of life. So you have different courses, different teachers, different situations. Okay. So that's the foundation of today's talk and the way I'm going to look at this. As soul, God wants us as a gift of love to have a lot of different experiences. Different experiences is a synonym for change. So can I get a thumbs up if this is making sense? I think this view I want to start right out with because I don't think most people on the planet that think you have one life, that you're a body, you're not soul, would be comfortable with that view. So I'm not going to follow what I found online, the normal steps of grief and all the psychological things. I'm going to take it from the point that God sent us down here to get experience. And the more change, although uncomfortable, equals what? More experience. And most change, when we look back, turns out to be a positive. But for some reason, we still struggle. Even if you get a promotion at work, sometimes the change or a different job at work, it still can be a difficult transition, at least for our mind. So starting from that point. Abrupt changes. Now, if you plan to change, retirement or something, you know it's coming 5, 10 years ahead, that's one thing. But abrupt changes, what does that do for us? Often it can cause shock, disorientation, confusion, uncertainty, fear, and that can evolve into anger. A lot of times, the anger is more related to fear of the change, and how we cope sometimes, it immediately goes to anger. But that can take away the quality of life and the abundance of life that we're working for. If change triggers that, that's uncomfortable. And it's something I hope the suggestions day, I don't think I have a magic pill, but if you can get through it quicker, a little less disorientation, a little more confidence, and transition, integrate the new change in life a little sooner, I think that's worth the discussion today. If it minimizes some of the shock, you're not surprised change comes. That's why we're here, to have all these experiences, which means we need change. So eventually we accept the change, we get a new normal, and hopefully move on and regain our balance. So if I can reduce some stress and strain through some things I'll share today, I think it may not be a magic pill, but it's something. So I think before I get into some steps and paint a picture of change, I think just knowing that change is actually how we grow and get new experience. I hope just that thought alone, and if I didn't cover anything else today and you really reflected on that, I would hope next time you have shock of a change in a relationship or a career or health issue, just knowing that's part of the program down here, that's how we gain experience and learn to give and receive love in different situations, some very disguised in giving and receiving love. Just knowing that, it might help with the transition. Another thing about change is sometimes we're working off karma. Some relationships, marriages, for example, and I don't want to make this sound bad, but often it's based on love. But a lot of relationships that run their course and they end, and about 50% of marriages in the United States end in separation, divorce. Sometimes you're working out karma from a past life or situation. And once the karma is worked out, even though the separation or divorce is difficult and can be very stressful, I think many of you I'm looking at have been divorced. I have also been divorced. It's not easy. You never completely get over it. But if you work out the karma with that individual soul, it's actually a blessing to move on and get some new lessons. Although when you're going through that, that probably doesn't sound very comforting, but just hopefully you're not going through it right now. Our mind, we'll get into some keys, understanding change, and that I'll talk about in a minute. As soul, we've been around for eons. We've experienced a lot of change. And as soul, we're generally more comfortable with change. The mind has only had one life, this life. You're given a new mind in every incarnation. It has less experience than soul has changed, and it's less comfortable. Even a good change, the mind can sometimes be uncomfortable. The mind generally wants comfort and security. Okay? It's not looking for change, it's not looking for growth. It wants comfort and security. What does soul want? Soul wants freedom. And God's plan and the change and profit and the relationship with Heavenly Father and nourishing yourself at soul over time will bring freedom. That's a higher goal. But the mind resists change because it wants comfort and security. So you can see kind of why in my key understanding change, why the mind, I don't think I actually mentioned it in the book. The mind generally wants comfort and security and stability. Soul wants freedom. And freedom, more freedom requires change and growth. And that's the foundation I actually did not put in the keys book, why the mind struggles, even with good change sometimes, and soul generally adapts much quicker than the mind. So I want to get into painting a picture of change, but for most of you, I'm looking at on screen right now, you know some of your former lives. In some lives you come back as male, sometimes you incarnate as female, sometimes you're well off, sometimes you're very poor, sometimes you incarnate during relatively peaceful periods of history, sometimes you incarnate in warring times. This is a warring planet, so that's not unusual. Some incarnations you find profit in the physical, some you do not. Okay, there's a lot of change there. The point of all these varied incarnations is to gain experience. If you incarnate in a poor family or a poor country, that will give you different experiences than in a more freer or wealthier country. If you come back in a certain race, in a certain body, your soul, but if you take the body of a race that's out of favor at that particular point of history, you're going to have a different lesson than the race that's in favor in that particular time in history. If you come back as male, you have certain experiences, and females. Okay. But part of God's plan is soul. You're still soul, but you're put in different bodies in different situations, different countries, different types of families to gain experience. So I'm starting to paint a picture that everything down here is about growing and getting new experiences. And that's synonymous, getting new experiences with what? Change. So if we learn to cope with change and can deal with change, good and bad or ugly, whatever, but change is inevitable down here. If we can more gracefully get through it, it's easier on us and we'll have a little more abundant life if we don't have quite so much stress, fear, anger, shock, and disorientation. We'll have some of that. I have that. I had a lot of change in my life this year, Lynn and I both, and I had some shock, disorientation, some sadness, and some anger. But I think I got through it reasonably well. I think if I didn't have these teachings, my head would still be spinning. Now I actually see some blessings in it, actually see some positive points, and I'm actually kind of liking some of the changes. So I got through it probably quicker than I would have 30, 40 years ago. But I still had my head spinning a bit and some disorientation, some shock and anger and discomfort, but not as much because I know God's ways like you all do. So let me just go down a real quick history lesson, and then I'll try to get into some ways to mitigate some of the shock and uncomfort, and the shock and disorientation of change. We'll start back. A lot of us were back 2,000 years ago with the Roman Empire. Roman Empire was like king of the world, it seemed. The Roman Empire is gone. The Spanish Empire at one time was kind of the king, had the most power. and then the Portuguese Empire, and then the British Empire, where the sun never set. You all know history to a certain degree. All those empires are in the pages of history. They're gone. Um, Many countries' boundaries on maps. I like geography, and in high school, I'd have a globe and a map, and I study geography. We also studied history in high school. I don't know what they study now, but we studied history and the Constitution and why this republic and all that good stuff, and why we should be grateful for this country. But the maps I had as a kid in high school are very inaccurate now. A lot of country borders have changed. Czechoslovakia is broke by design into two different countries. They're two different groups, kind of, and they peacefully decided to break into two countries. The Soviet Union, which was a big thing when I was in the Navy, that was the threat. At least we saw that as the threat. When I was flying jets to the Navy, I was following Russian bombers with a big red star for hours on end, ready to shoot them down if I was given the word. Now the Soviet Union's gone, and it's back to Russia, a smaller empire. So every civilization on Earth eventually seems to evolve, change, disappear, and a new one takes over. In South America and the Central America, the Incas, the Aztecs, all those, the pyramids down in Mexico, the pyramids in Egypt, all those empires eventually change. And we can be sad about it, but that's part of the way God plans it down here. And I hope just recognizing that helps us a little bit. Former ice ages. When I was young, I spent a lot of time in the summers in a place I still love very much, Yosemite, California. It's stunning. I used to rock climb there as an explorer's scout. Actually, rocks and rappelling and crampons and all that. I went 400 feet up the apron on the glacier. Not a real high level, not like El Capitan or climbing Half Dome, but I practically grew up in Yosemite. The beautiful carvings of Yosemite and Half Dome especially, which my son and I slept on years ago when he was about 7 years old, slept on top of and played Frisbee on top of it. That was all carved by former ice ages. So the power and the amazing ability to change the surface of the earth of former ice ages, a great example of that's Yosemite, California. A lot of the beautiful things we admire about Yosemite and the granite that's carved so beautifully were former ice ages. Ice ages are gone. They might come back, but now they're gone. Now people worry about global warming. Well, we've had a fairly mild winter up here. I'm actually, if things warm up, I'm fine. I'd rather shovel less snow. So if the climate warms up a bit, it always warms, it cools. That's part of living on the planet. That's the way God designed it. Continents separate. Our continents are actually still moving slightly. The tectonic plates are still moving slightly. So if we have global warming, some people will be disadvantaged if you have a beach house, but that's their problem. People in the mountains like us, I'll shovel less snow. If I was a farmer like Damien there, maybe you'll have a longer growing season. So everything's in change, even the weather, empires, that's just to be expected. So far the change I'm talking about, you're probably going, yeah, whatever, it doesn't affect you a whole lot. And that's true. So let's get into some changes that aren't so distant, but a little more personal, that actually affect us. Global warming, I don't think something you really should worry about. Ice ages, we're not going to be living long enough to see another ice age or much global warming probably. And the movement of the continents is so small that I don't think we're going to be able to measure them. So let's get into things that start to be a legitimate challenge for us. I read, and I'm going to look at my card now. I read that for every death of an individual, thousands of people die every day. And it could be from any cause, a pandemic, an accident, disease, a natural disaster, like the tornado that went through the 5 states a while back. Apparently 9 9 people. If one person passes, 9 other people, this is a study, it probably varies, but this is a thumb rule, grieve due to the loss and the change. It affects 9 other people deeply where they're grieving. Now, some people it might be more, but that's an average. This could be a grandparent, a parent, a sibling, a spouse, a child, a close friend. When you have a loss like that, and I'm looking at some folks on the screen that had a loss recently. um, Now this gets more personal than ice ages. This gets a little tougher, or weather patterns. That's kind of distance. I wanted to show that change is inevitable, but those types of changes don't affect us much emotionally. But when you have a loss, that does. The loss of a loved one has a huge impact on our life. And I hope some of the things I get into will help a little bit. 30% of individuals between 35 and 65, these are facts I looked up online, give or take a bit. I'm not buying into them, but it gives you an idea. Between 35 and 65, 30% of individuals will have some kind of disability where they're limited, either physically, emotionally, or mentally for a period of time, maybe 90 days or more. And if you're used to doing something and you can't do it, that can be stressful. Um, this kind of change is more challenging. Again, it's more personal than an ice age. I understand that. Another area of change that's difficult to cope with is a divorce or marriage. And as I said earlier, this number has been pretty steady as far as I know for years, around 50%. And I don't know about other countries like Germany or other places, about 50% of American marriages end up in divorce or separation. And I'm looking at a lot of folks on the screen, including myself, has been through that. And that can be very challenging. Even if you look back 10, 20 years later and you're so happy and you're so happy in a new relationship, that's really tough to get through. And I don't have a magic pill for that, but some of the things I'll share today, I hope will at least help with the transition, okay? 41% of all first marriages end up in separation. So death, disability, divorce, these types of changes, these are the ones that really have an impact on us. Almost all of us, I think, struggle with these changes more than ice ages and weather patterns and empires come and go. Okay. So this is the stuff we'll talk about more. And again, the reason I hesitated doing this talk, I thought I was supposed to do this. I really felt guided to do this, partly from my experience this year. I felt my boss was saying, somebody in this group or several of you maybe need this topic today. But I hesitated because I'm so frustrated because I can't wave a wand and make the pain go away, or the stress or the fear or the worry go away. So I actually kind of hesitated for about a week. I knew this is what I was supposed to do. And then I got 8 or 9 things that it may not be a magic pill, but I hope it'll help. And we'll get to those soon. I don't pretend to be able to remove the pain, sorrow, sadness, or depression. And some change can cause all of those besides anger or whatever. But sadness and depression, I think, for a lot of us is where it goes. One of the things that helps when I went through some changes this year and when I was divorced many, many years ago and changed the careers and lost my parents, lost my grandparents, my favorite uncle, you lose pets, all those things, change of careers. Anything I've gone through, any kind of change I've gone through that's been difficult, I know others have gone through the same thing. And this isn't one of the things that's supposed to help, but maybe it can help. If you know you're not alone and whatever you're going through, it's virtually certain others have gone through the same thing. How many of you think that can give you a little bit, maybe a teeny bit of help, knowing you're not alone? That I found that helped. The changes this year I went through with some things. It was actually one of the more difficult years for Lynn and I. I know other people go through that. Other prophets have gone through that. It didn't help like 99%, but it helped maybe 5%. It helped a little bit. So maybe that's something. It's not on my list, but I thought I'd mention it. All these experiences and feelings we have, a lot of other people have this similar experiences and the same feelings. We're not alone in this. And I think that gives us maybe a little bit of comfort, maybe just 4 or 5% of comfort. Uh, a little bit more and change to make it even more real. I think it's 2 weeks ago, there's a tornado that went through about 5 states in the United States, Kentucky, Tennessee, and some other states. How many remember seeing that on the news? Do most of you remember that? From what I understand, it was a real record tornado. And it just got down on the ground and went for like hundreds of miles. Imagine the change these people are going through. We prayed at the last gathering we got together at the family gathering a few weeks ago. We prayed for these folks. My heart goes out to them. We have change in our life, but or maybe you're going through a relationship challenge. Imagine these folks. I think it was a town in Kentucky. They lost loved ones. Hundreds of people died, so they lost loved ones. Remember how many people are affected by that? And this whole town, and for hundreds of miles, they lost their house. So they lost a loved one. They lost their house. They lost their business or their place of employment. It was just leveled. And they lost pets probably. And some of these people, and I forgot the town name in Kentucky, the entire town was leveled. Can you imagine what those folks are going through? They lost a loved one, and that can be very difficult. They lost their home. That alone can be difficult. They lost the career or their job or their business they maybe built for years or worked at a place for years. That can be very challenging. They lost a pet. Their pets are a family. And this one town, the entire town is gone. So if we have changes in our life, I guess we're getting off pretty easy compared to, I cannot comprehend the challenge these people are going through. How many remember we prayed for all these souls? We also prayed for the people in Ida, the hurricane a year or so ago. A lot of people died in New York. Those types of changes, we just hope they don't come into our lives. But there's folks out there going through a lot more challenges of the changes than us, or change in career, change in health or relationship. I don't know if that helps or makes it worse, but maybe it puts in perspective the changes we're going through, although are definitely a challenge to us sometimes, and they come and go, changes. Sometimes you get a few years steady, then a few years you get some changes or something. But compared to somebody that lost a loved one, their house, their career, their pet, and their entire town, I can't hardly comprehend with that. And I don't think my talk today would do them much good. I think there's a point, somehow you just have to work through it. I'm sure those people will work through it, but I don't have a magic pill for them. But it makes some of our changes and challenges maybe put it in perspective. So there's other changes. The changes I've talked about create grief, loss of loved ones, divorces, the people, the tornado victims. There's some grieving there, understandably, and that's probably a healthy thing to grieve and work through that. That's actually something you don't want to try to suck it up and not experience that. You feel what you feel. But maybe some things a day you can get through it and stay in balance a little quicker. Grieving is actually part of the process, and it's healthy. I want to get into some things where you're not grieving, but they can still be challenges. For example, kids, when you move and you have children that change schools and they change friends, I don't know if they're grieving, but that can be a challenge for the kids. It can be a challenge for the adults moving to a new location, even if it's a better job, finding their way around a new town, getting to know the new boss, the new lay of the land. I'll give you an example that helps. And this is a bit how you can build on success from the past, from your past successes. And I'll cover this more later. When I was in the Navy, I moved fairly often, more than I do now. I don't move now much. Well, my body moves, but physically I don't move to new locations. When I was in the Navy, the first couple of times I moved, it was somewhat uncomfortable. I wasn't grieving, but I was uncomfortable. I didn't know the new lay of the land. I didn't know the new people I'd be working for, the new job. I didn't know where the banks and the grocery store and the gym and all those places were. I could hardly find my way around town. But I realized after about 30 days, I've shared this with some of you, after about 30 days, I kind of settled in. Okay, it was like changing teachers in college, a little scary the first week, and then you settle in and move on. So the next time I moved in the Navy, and I felt a little stress, I didn't really know my way around a new town. I'm walking around with a map before GPS. You had maps, trying to figure out where to shop and work out, and the banking and groceries and all that kind of stuff, and how to get to my job. I remembered back that it took me about 3 to 4 weeks, about 30 days last time I moved in the Navy, and then I felt fine. I don't know if you can see what I'm saying, but then the next time, even though I was a little disoriented, it didn't stress me much because I knew 3 or 4 weeks I'll be fine again. And each time I moved, it was less and less stressful. And I think the last time I moved in the Navy, because I kept building on my former change and I kept learning from it. And I think the last time I moved, a week or two, I felt at home again. So is that this? Can you see that might help? If you have certain changes in life and you've been through similar changes, job or career, promotions, demotions, hiring, firing, or maybe relationships, maybe not marriages, but other boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever. If you look back and see that you got through it, maybe the next time something similar happens, you can build on that success and go, okay, you're going to get through it again. You might still have challenges, but you go in with a positive attitude and a confidence knowing you're going to get through it. You've done it before, you'll do it again. I'm not sure that's on the list, but that might be something also helps. Okay. Change in relationships. I think some of these are the hardest for us. And I'll give you a couple examples. Parents have certain relations, and I can relate also with this. Parents have a relationship with their kids when they're young. Their whole life revolves around the kids, and the whole life for the kids revolves around the parents. And it's really beautiful. And that works for a while until the kids start having outside interests. They actually have friends outside the family, school projects, they get a car, and they have girlfriends or boyfriends, and they start having their own personal interests, and the relationship slowly changes. Then they leave home, and this is all to be expected, right? Nobody should be surprised at this. But is it stressful? I see Chris and Molly nodding. It's still uncomfortable sometimes because even though you want your kids to grow up and have their own life and get out on their own, in fact, you hope they get out on their own. You don't want them at the house forever. Get out and make a living and whatever. It's still a change. And although it's beautiful in one way, and I'm looking at Chris and Molly, your kids are getting older, it's different. And it's not grieving, it's not stressful, but it's still a change to adapt to. And if you keep treating your kids the same way, the relationship's going to be strained. So if you know ahead of time and you know it's a good thing, but it's still difficult in some ways to see your kids grow up and not care about you quite so much. They got their own life. That's the way life is, but you need to adapt to that. Now, if you know that's the way life is, you can plan ahead a bit and start building a different relationship. This year, I've had quite a transition with some of my grandchildren. I've got 5 granddaughters, and it's been a bit painful in different ways. But when grandpa and grandma, like Lynn and I, are kind of the center of attention sometimes, we like that. That's what grandparents like, and all these cute little girls and stuff, and now a boy. But when they start getting older, for example, my oldest granddaughter has a car. She's off the property lot. She has a job. She's in college, and she's teaching in college at the same time. She has a boyfriend. I've told her for years, boys are bad, but she didn't listen. So she's an amazing granddaughter, but the relationship is different. So I'm not grieving. It's not stressful. It's not like a tornado victim, but it's inevitable and it requires changing my relationship with my granddaughters and not having quite so much of their attention. When they were little, they want to go see grandma and grandpa. These things, I guess, again, it's not like ice ages and global warming or whatever, but if we know they're coming, what you do is you still have a relationship, but the relationship evolves and changes. Your little kids, you have a relationship with in a certain way. When they're adults, it's a different type of relationship. And if you know it can be beautiful, it can be actually really refreshing to have a new type of relationship, and you don't try to stay in the old relationship because you're afraid of change, then this all works out fine. So I wanted to share a couple of things that are personal, but they're not dramatic like your house falling down, but they're still change. Okay. Siblings, for example, siblings grew up. My brother and I were pretty close. I don't talk to him much now. He lives on the other side of the country. Wish him well. Things just evolve and change. I think that's normal. So, and one more area change, and then I'll get into some, hopefully some suggestions. It's taking a little longer. Technology. Wow. Um, my head just spins with the technological changes coming around. The rate of change in the technology is stunning. My grandparents, for example, and they've all passed away now. They're born in late 1800s. Think about this. They did not have electricity when they were young, cars or airplanes. It boggles my mind. And I used to think, oh my gosh, they're the change they saw. And I think one of my grandmother saw somebody land on the moon. And there wasn't even a plane when she was, or a car. They used to have horse and buggies. Another grandmother was in the territory that's Oklahoma. It wasn't even a state, but Native Americans, the people riding through town on horses. And when they passed away, there were jet airplanes and cars and all kinds of stuff. But the technology we see in our lives is also stunning, the changes in technology. So why am I mentioning this? I know some older people, and I might be in this category, that can barely hook up a modern TV. For some, change is very stimulating. I love technology to a point. I've got a master's in engineering. I do like technology, but it can be really hard to keep up with. There's older people that need a young person, their grandkids, to hook up their TV. The change is stunning. And I actually sometimes wonder if the human race, our psyche, can really handle this much change this quickly. In some ways, it's more change than my grandparents experienced. And if you're somebody that you love the change, fine, but a lot of people struggle with this. Some older folks just give up. They just give up. They don't email, and they have somebody like a grandkid come in and hook up a TV. It's too much for them. I'm kind of borderline. I like it, but luckily Lynn takes care of a lot of that stuff. So, and I want to give you real quick, just in my lifetime, the change, and you're going to see so much more because I'm older than most of you. When I went to the U.S. Naval Academy, engineering, of course, in Annapolis, Maryland, we did not have handheld calculators, little laptop computers. You buy them now for a couple bucks in the store. We had what's called a slide rule. I don't know if anybody even knows what that is. It's a slide ruler. I don't think businesses making those are doing well now. To figure a high-end math problem or an engineering problem, we use slide rules. Sliding this thing around, and I don't think I could use one now. And the last year at the Naval Academy, a few guys started having handheld calculators. You do math on it, and they were $300, $400, $500. The same computer capability now is probably $15 at Walmart. I never got one. I couldn't afford it when I was at the academy. The amount of computer power that put Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon in 1969, You have multiples, many, many multiples of computer power and technology in your cell phone than what we use to get on the moon. That's just in my lifetime. Okay. When I was at the academy, of course, engineering and math and all that, which I like, we had very basic computers that we had to plug wires in depending on what we wanted to calculate. Then I'd have to write my own software. I don't know if this software, it was Fortran. Anybody remember Fortran? And Basic and some of these others. We had to learn the language. I'd have to wire the program. It was a big old box. And then I'd run what was punch cards, little cards with holes in them, kind of like dangling Chaz, the Florida elections, if you remember that, to get a simple math thing that I could probably do in my head now. So that's a lot of change in technology. And now, of course, I love this Apple smartphone. But even though that's really good change for most of us, for some people, it can be a bit stressful. So, but one more thing and I'll move on. There's an MIT, that's Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's a college, who's an inventor there. And he also is a futurist, a guy that looks in the future and thinks he knows. I don't believe any of this, but I just put it out for fun. And God may have a plan that changes all this direction. So I don't put much stock in it, but just for fun, this guy thinks he knows where we're going the next 100 years. And he also works at Google. So pretty smart guy. He says the next 100 years, we will experience 20,000 years of change. And he breaks it down. It's just a linear math problem. It's not really all that fancy. And it really shouldn't be a linear math. It's more exponential, but he didn't do the math right in my view. So he says in the next 10 years, which we should be able to do the next 10 years, I think. Maybe not. Hopefully we can all handle the next 10 years. He says we'll have 2,000 years of change. So what if this guy's off and it's only, 200 years of change? My grandparents, the change they had, the change just in my life from college, navigating like Christopher Columbus, and now it's a whole new ballgame. And that was the modern Navy post World War II. So a lot of change. So we went from ice ages to tornado victims and on down to relationships and marriages, down to grandma that can't turn on her TV. So she needs help.